Hello, everyone. Welcome to an Iliad Deep Dive. I'm Julia Rodriguez Elliott, Artistic Co-Director and Director of an Iliad. As a reminder, if you have any questions for us anytime during our chat today, go ahead and put it on the chat and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. We have a terrific panel today who will share their thoughts on an Iliad from multiple perspectives. So we're going to just jump right in, and I'm going to ask our first panelist to join us, and that is Miranda Johnson Haddad. And hi, Miranda.
Hi, Julia. Hi, everyone.
And Miranda is fondly known around Anois Within as Anois Within's goddess of knowledge. And I think that's something she's shared with her children, and now I think they call her that as well, right?
I wish. I'm working on it.
She is a brilliant Shakespeare scholar and dramaturg, and we're delighted that she's with us here today. The next person I'd like to invite in is Karen Hall. And Karen, hi Karen.
Hello.
Karen is the composer and cellist for an Iliad. And we also have Ken Booth, who is an Anois Within resident artist and lighting designer. I think Ken may be running a little late because he's filming today, but he'll hopefully join us at some point during our conversation. And then finally, Eric Pargech, who is our marketing director, and also he's, in this process wearing a slightly different hat. He's an Iliad filming consultant and also a post-production supervisor. So thank you guys for being here today for this conversation around an Iliad. So I'd like to think of you guys as friends of an Iliad. And perhaps we'll start with Miranda. Miranda, would you set the stage a little bit for us and talk a little bit about Homer's Iliad and how the writers Lisa Peterson and Dennis O'Hare approach this particular take on the story?
Sure, absolutely. So I will just quickly refresh all our memories about the Trojan War and about Homer. And I have a slide that I think Kayla is gonna be able to put up of a map of, there we go. Troy very famously was at the mouth of the Dardanelles. It was enormously significant from a maritime military perspective. Interestingly, archaeologists have identified about 9 settlements over the course of Troy's 4,000-year history. So there were many iterations of Troy. The events of the Iliad, Homer's Iliad, to the extent that they actually happened, took place somewhere between 1700 and 1200 BCE, before the Common Era. So those are the facts. The myth of the Trojan War has a far more significance and far more in the way of influence down the millennia. The war began. The origins of the war lie in strife. Eris, the goddess of strife, who was a sister to Ares, the god of war, tossed the golden apple of discord into a gathering of the gods and said the most beautiful goddess should have it. Athena, Hera, and Aphrodite all made a grab for it. So Zeus decided that Paris, the prince of Troy, would decide who should get it. And I have a slide here depicting the judgment of Paris that we'll see. So this is one of many depictions of this famous moment. Athena offered Paris wisdom. He gave the apple to her. Hera, who's off on the right, you see her peacock down below, offered him power. Aphrodite offered him the most beautiful woman in the world. That would be Helen of Sparta as his wife. Small detail, Helen was already married, but this didn't bother Aphrodite or apparently Paris. So we see the origins of the war are in discord. It just lies at the very, very foundation of this myth. Now, in terms of the Trojan War and the events of Homer's Iliad and how they have endured in popular culture and popular imagination, it really would be very hard to overestimate the extent to which the myth of Troy is with us from Game of Thrones on back. There are countless examples. I have a slide showing just two. Thank you. So here's Brad Pitt in the I think it was 2006 film version. Brad Pitt was Achilles, and on the left, of course, we see our own USC mascot, the Trojan horse. Get it? Traveler being ridden by a Trojan, and of course, the Trojans are the mascot of USC. For any Bruins on the call, I feel your pain. We are a house divided here among UCLA and USC. Okay, so a quick refresher about Homer's Iliad. To the extent that Homer actually was a person, he probably lived sometime between 800 and 700 BCE. He may have been a composite. We know that the events of his poem, the Iliad, had been around in an oral tradition for some centuries. He or they wrote it down for the first time. The title, the Iliad comes from the classical name for Troy, which was Ilium. So an Iliad would have been a song about Troy and the events of the Trojan War. The Homer's Iliad ends not with the fall of Troy, but with the funeral rites for Hector. And it really is a very concise period of time that Homer's Iliad covers, weeks at the most, possibly days. But it is chiefly concerned with Achilles and primarily with the rage of Achilles. Rage is very famously the first word of Homer's Iliad. And interestingly, the Greek word menon is more typically used of the gods rather than of mortals. But Achilles' epithet, of course, was godlike Achilles. So there's this sense of a superhuman rage underlying all the events of Homer's Iliad. And it's really that idea of rage that is the jumping off point, I think, for Peterson and O'Hare's play An Iliad. And we notice that this is an Iliad. It's not the Iliad. It's one of many possibilities, and I'll circle back to that at the very end of my remarks. So Homer's poem is both an inspiration and a jumping off point for Peterson and O'Hare. Their play is a performance of the events of Homer's Iliad. It's also a meditation upon the themes of Homer's Iliad and how we understand them today. There are two characters, the poet and the muse. The poet is the only speaking character. He or she is a storyteller, is a performer, also apparently an eyewitness to the events of the Trojan War. And the poet is clearly doomed to retell this story again and again until we no longer need to hear it. Early on in the play, the poet says, "Every time I sing this song, I hope it's the last time." The muse is, and you will be hearing from our own muse very soon, the muse is the composer of the music for any given production, and also a performer. And I said that the poet is the only character who speaks. That's not entirely true. The muse does not have lines, and yet there is very much a conversation going on between the muse and the poet through the music, and you'll hear about that, I'm sure, a lot more from Karen. The casting for An Iliad is famously variable, and I have 3 slides now just showing you just a sample. This is Dennis O'Hare, who first created the role. He was the author, and he first created it. And his interpretation, as you see, very sort of, he looks like he could be in Waiting for Godot. He's right out of Beckett with his costume and demeanor. The second slide is completely different. This was from a 2019 production at Long Wharf Theater in Connecticut. Here we see the poet is a woman of color. Her muse is a young man with a guitar, and the set, to the extent that it's there, is the amps and the equipment surrounding the musical instrument. The final slide I have is from a production in 2015 at Shakespeare and Company in Lenox, Massachusetts. And here we see the poet is very much a veteran. He's in his combat fatigues. He's in his uniform. He's very much still of the war. So as we see, there's just enormous variety, infinite variety, if you will, in how this play can be can be staged. And just to conclude, I think the themes, circling back, the themes we see in Peterson and O'Hare's play certainly are the stories we tell. We tell ourselves, we tell each other, and how we tell them. This idea of bearing witness, because the poet and the muse bear witness to the events of the war, and we bear witness to them. And then finally, I think the enduring theme is again this idea of rage. The poet says at one point that Achilles is addicted to rage, as so many of us are, he or she adds. And I think what Peterson and O'Hare are investigating here is the idea that on an individual level, we're all addicted to rage. Achilles is, we all are, when, you know, someone, some idiot cuts us off in traffic. But when we expand that rage, that individual rage to a national level, we end up with war. And yet there's a hopeful element, I think, to Peterson and O'Hare's play. Maybe there will be a version one day in which war ends and the poet's task is over. And I just wanted to leave you with a quotation by Denis O'Hare, the actor and the playwright. He says, cynicism never even occurs to the poet. He definitely gets demoralized, but he's convinced that one day it'll work. I'm not cynical either, says O'Hare. I'm an optimist when it comes to what we can do. So those are just some thoughts I have about the play in the background and ways we might approach our conversation today and going forward.
Thank you so much, Miranda. That's terrific. One of the things that I feel that they're very successful in the writing of an Iliad is that, you know, that rage that you're talking about, the audience is really complicit in all of that. So besides trying to make the story accessible to them and giving them modern parallels, or there's a constant reminder in the text that all of us who are gathered here are part of that rage. And I find that aspect of an Iliad very intriguing.
Absolutely. And I think therein also lies the hope, because if we're complicit in this rage, as indeed we are, if we're all complicit in perpetuating endless war, then there's also the hope that we can make a different choice.
Yes, and the do you see and you see theme, which is recurring in the story. So Karen, Miranda's talked a little bit about where the muse fits in, and indeed in the production, the muse in our case is a cellist, and while we sometimes think of an Iliad as a one person show, it really isn't. It's really about these two characters, and the conversations that they're having is really central to the story. So I would love for you to speak first as the composer, and how you approached the music in an Iliad. What were you thinking about before, as you read it, and before you started rehearsal, and before you met with the director even, or the cast?
Yeah, so I had the script, and I knew I wanted to read it from an emotional standpoint first, not an analytical standpoint. So that the first read through, I probably cried at points. There were just very obviously emotional themes that came up. And then I went through it with my highlighter and my pencil, and I would highlight places where it was going to be about the muse. I already knew it was in the script, like they're very much a character. But then also what words that had energy behind them, or strong emotions that would probably drive through, as well as where the poet's playing particular characters, so that if I want to have a theme for a character, there's something that I can draw back on. So there were a lot of different layers, but to me, it's always important first to get that gut instinct, like the heart in the gut, where you're just like, oh, it needs more so than the like, what could I do here kind of feeling, which grows when I'm with the person, because, you know, what I thought it needed might not be true at all. And so in a live scoring compositional process where I'm in rehearsal with you, I have my ideas, but I don't have notes written down. I still have feelings written down. And then the notes I commit to come out of that kind of symbiotic process of being present with the actors and the director and the lights. Even the lights changed things drastically for me. Yeah.
And were there any themes that emerged for you fairly early in the process when you think about musical themes?
Yeah, definitely a lot. I knew that Achilles would have a very triumphant theme, that it would be almost like a horn kind of call that came out. I knew that Hector's theme would revolve around when we learn music and you learn ear training, they always encourage you to tie it to a song that you know. So the songs that I sort of, I guess, kept tying it to was both the idea of like this Brahms lullaby, sort of very caring, nurturing, because the first time we really meet Hector, he's with his kid and his wife, and it's very sweet. And then if you just flip it on its head, you get this taps interval, which is death, this remembrance. And so the way you could flip things around and get intervals to me was something that I was sort of playing with on those two. And then the two themselves fight with each other. They're just a half tone apart. So to move between the two, you're constantly getting that conflict, and it might not have resolution, and the play does not end with resolution. So neither does the music.
Do you happen to have your cello there with you? And might you like to share a couple of those themes?
Do I? Yeah, I do have to unplug. So just we'll find out what happens with audio. Yeah, we still there?
Yeah, you're still here.
Great. What? This? A cello? We do have it. So we'll start with the Achilles theme, which is a little more triumphant. So it's very simple, and there's definitely, for me, the cello can only play up to 2 notes at a time. So the opportunities you get with guitars or piano to stack and modulate and move are in a much more limited capacity on an instrument that can really only get 2 notes at a time. And so with Achilles' themes, there's really a layering that happens. He is everything. Whereas with Hector, we move from this very happy tonal center to it's very sparse. So that way, my hope was always that whoever's listening has to really sit in it. There can't be that movement that you even get with a piano, where one hand keeps you interested and one hand keeps you centered. Everything the muse does hopefully serves to make everyone have to sit with it together. I know I definitely sat with it, and the actors are definitely in it, but my hope is that listeners also kind of have to just center in that gravity.
And are there things for you that you discovered once you got to rehearsal? It's such an interesting relationship that the muse has with the poet. At times she supports, she encourages, she rejoices with him, she creates the environment and helps facilitate storytelling. And then there are moments where she demands, she argues with him, and all this is done through music, where there are things that were revelatory once you got into rehearsal and began working with the actors.
Yes, so many things. First of all, I cut so many things. There's so many opportunities for silence, which is not to talk myself up, but the great gift of any composer is knowing when to cut. And Julia was also very much like, I think you need to cut in some places, because
sound is totally irrelevant if we don't have the silence to contrast it with. So that was something, just finding places where it's like, this part means nothing, and having the patience to still be on stage sitting there doing nothing is sometimes
and that's one thing that when we talked early on, we were certain that we were going to have more music than we needed, and it was really going to be about editing once we got into it, because there's something about that spareness, which is one of the reasons that I loved the idea of a cello that is very right for the piece. There's something that needs to be really unadorned, and it's really about the power of storytelling, that all you need is a great story and an individual telling that story. And so we found ourselves doing a lot of editing. There's a question that here someone would like to know. Let's see, is it Trish? Since there are two actors playing the poet, did the music need to change depending on who was playing the poet? So in our production, we have two poets, Deborah Strang and Jeff Elliott, so a female poet and a male poet. So did you find, did the music change?
The timing of it really changed.
Mm-hmm.
I think there were definitely places where by nature, I think, or not, maybe by society, but for whatever reason, females tend to lead more, I guess, nurturingly, I would say. Often that's the way we perceive, So I think Deb's energy was often a little more, less rage-filled at times, Like I think just by power and build, oftentimes we associate men being really able to project into the rage, where I think Deb had a slower cadence at times. So finding those pacings within the two different actors, I didn't necessarily change the music cues, but especially if I knew where I needed to get to, the way in which I got there would adjust to whoever was speaking the lines in volume or in pacing to match that energy. And there was one thing I wanted to say with, as far as how it changed on stage, there was really this idea that I started to get of like, anytime they went out of my view, I would have to push at them, which I hadn't even thought of until I was with them. And I was like, I don't like you being behind me, So even the speed in which Jeff or Deb would break that plane with me would determine how I needed to push at them or communicate with them. So all those, just how fast they chose to walk and change the way some places.
And that's one of the things that I think in making the decision to have two actors play the role was really exciting to us, because I was very curious, and I'll be curious to see once audiences experience it, how the story and the whole issue of rage resonates when the messenger is male versus the messenger being female. So I think that was something that you, Karen, were personally responding to.
Yes, most definitely.
There's one of my favorite conversations between the poet and the muse is I think it's in part 3, I think it is, where the poet describes a war, and it's one of those moments where both the muse and the poet are completely in sync, and it's one of my favorite moments in the show. And I think we have a clip of that. So Kayla, if you can share that.
This is what the war looks like. At last, the armies clashed at one strategic point. They slammed their shields together. Pike scraped pike with the grappling strength of fighters armed in bronze. Their round shields pounded, boss on welded boss, and the sound of struggle roared and rocked the earth. Screams of men and cries of triumph breaking in one breath. Fighters killing, fighters killed, and the ground streamed blood wildly as two winter torrents raging down from the mountains, swirling into a valley, hurl their great waters together, plunging down in a gorge. And miles away in the hills, A shepherd hears the thunder. So from the grinding armies broke the cries and crash of war. And terror and rout and relentless strife stormed too. Sister of manslaughtering Ares, Ares' comrade in armed strife. Only a slight thing when she first rears her head, but soon her head hits the sky as she strides across the earth. Now strife hurled down the leveler, hate amidst both sides, wading into the onslaught, flooding men with pain.
That's great. I love that moment. We had the luxury of having Karen with us from the very start of rehearsal. So I think that was one moment that was fully developed and realized in the process. We didn't really go into it necessarily with any preconceived ideas. Is that right, Karen?
Yeah, I know the script asks for the muse to lead us into that moment, but we really had no idea what that moment would be. And that, I think, was also a moment where Jeff is able to just get their full volume, and Deb is a little more like set up, which I think is maybe I don't know, like who knows anymore. But the projection was so different between the two of them in that moment for me in terms of my pacing, and it was fun to play with that when they come behind me. And also just, I saw in the chat there were some questions or comments about the muses, which I did research into as well. And the muses' job always is to provide the inspiration, which I very much felt like the whole way through. I knew that wherever they were going, I had to go there first, which is awful, to be like, and now I'm angry, and now I'm sad, and now like to just have to dive into these the places that people don't want to look at within themselves. And so that was one of those moments where it was just like, how much do I have to give you? And we're just, glaring at one another. It's a very intense moment between the two of us.
It is. And I think that it was Miranda, I think it was you who called it the berserk rage.
Yes, that's correct, and the term, as some of you know, comes from a remarkable study by Jonathan Shea called Achilles in Vietnam, and he talks particularly about the sort of war rage, the berserk rage, when there's no when logic deserts us, and we see examples of that in many types of mythologies, from the Irish tales of Cuchulainn and just right on through, this idea of being out of control with rage in the moment of war. Mm-hmm.
And a shout out to Miranda's son, who recommended a wonderful book called Achilles in Vietnam, which deals with this very issue, the psychological devastation of war. And he compares the Iliad to the Vietnam War. And I found that book to be such an incredible resource. It was truly profound. And I know both our actors really got so much out of it, because it just really brought it home in terms of the places that the poet goes to, and the impact that it has on him. So it's a terrific read if you have a chance. Oh my goodness, just in time. There's Ken Booth. I love it. So we're going to switch gears a bit here now and talk about filming an Iliad. And filming productions is not something that Noise Within typically does. So we do trailers of that sort of thing, but this whole notion of an actual filming of a production was really new to us. And so one of the things that I'm curious about, Ken, as a lighting designer, how did you think about lighting an Iliad? Did you think of it as lighting the show for a live production, or were you thinking of lighting the show for film?
Pretty much just for as if we were going to present a live production to audiences. And even though of course I knew that there would be cameras eventually, and I was aware of some of the positions that the cameras would be, I didn't fully visualize what those camera shots would be, but I figured, well, at least for our first time, I'm going to light it the way I would normally light it, create cues the way I would normally create cues for a show. especially for a show where you follow the actor or performers around with specials and such, and hope that I get lucky and everything looks good. I saw a rough cut, and I remember thinking, well, I remember when we were taping, and when the cinematographer and camera person finally put on the handheld cameras and started following the action upstage, I kind of cringed a bit because I thought, well, I didn't really light for these angles, but these high definition cameras are pretty forgiving, and plus it is even the lighting is fairly dramatic, so I figured that would be acceptable. I know when we do it live, the audiences aren't really looking at the lighting, and so it's a little more forgiving. But I noticed on camera, you do notice, at least, or you are a little more sensitive to, oh, I should have brought in some extra light here. Like there were times I wish I would have made the background just a little bit brighter, because sometimes you cut to, especially if it's a waist high shot where there's nothing in the background, it's just all black. And I did add some lights in the audience just in case the camera would shoot off the stage, and at least you would see something. But sometimes it was just nothing but a void, and I wish I would have maybe foreseen that a little bit better and just had some kind of flare light in the camera shot.
Well, I thought it was absolutely beautifully lit. I think that something like when you're filming, it just presents for us, it presented some exciting opportunities. In the film version, for instance, there were parts of the stage that are generally not part of a production because the actors are in places where the audience are not able to see them, and so we were able to use the back wall of the theater, and that right there is the shop door. So we were able to go way upstage and use these, wonderfully theatrical spaces that are not normally available to use. There's that wonderful back wall again. We also used a lot of lighting instruments in the space to great advantage. And I wonder, Ken, from your perspective, is it more exciting to light an environment like this one where it's so incredibly spare? I mean, so much of the story is about taking whatever objects are available to the poet within this environment to tell the story. So that, old-fashioned storytelling versus having a lot of scenic elements. So is that more exciting, more creatively fulfilling than lighting a set that has a lot of architecture, for lack of a better word?
If comparing this like non-set, which in a way is an abstract set, to like a realistic set, I think this is still a little more exciting than lighting your typical realistic interior of a house set or exterior of a house set. So there were a lot of, looking at some of the video, there were certain parts of the backstage I wish I had highlighted more, just to create more of that abstract setting. So, I loved the rawness of lighting the whole theater. I mean, for me, the theater space itself is very, precious to me. So I, treat it as if I was treating an actual built set.
You designers are never satisfied with what you do. There's always like, if only I had done this.
That's true. On opening night, that's always the case. Like, you finally see like you see this cue, like, oh, I should have created it, but I didn't think of it at the time.
How many opening nights have we spent together, and that's what we're talking about at opening night? I saw that cue tonight, and I wish I'd have done so and so to it.
Well, it's over 50. But
So
I just want to say, this recalls back to the space in Glendale when we did A Wild Holiday, which is a totally empty space, and that is still one of my favorite productions because I just loved the vast, like the way the theater space looks like with no, I mean it was just the vastness of the theater and the actors just getting to have the whole space, you know, rather than, let's say, compete or have any scenic elements in the background.
I love that. And I think the original production of An Iliad, and when you read some of the notes that Lisa Peterson and Dennis O'Hare write in the text, I think that they, in their minds, they had envisioned it as this poet, this eternal figure landing in this theater that is just that, a theater, and they tell the story with, again, whatever is available to them, rather than creating some kind of alternative environment for the story to live in. And I love that aspect of it. And I think lighting is so key in this production. And I think you did a beautiful job of lighting the show.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I saw some of the wide shots in the rough cut, and I mean, I was a little surprised. Like, it looked better than I thought it would be. Like, all the background, you know, the wall. The wall looked really. I love the wall. Like, I love seeing the wall and the ladder to the catwalk bridge, and the, you know, a little bit of the fly rail line set ropes that you see, and so. If we ever do this again, I'll want to highlight those even more.
There's these wonderful light trees that are essentially these pipes with lights on them, and I think once you see the recording of it, you'll find that there were a lot of interesting and dynamic ways of using those that I thought really added to the production. So Eric, talk to us a little bit about the process of filming An Iliad, you know, starting with all the crazy COVID protocol to, you know, the editing of it, and just talk us through that experience a little bit.
Yeah, so we had, you know, we were following equity, the Actors Equity Union requirements, and there was quite a lot we had to do. We had everyone, before coming on set or before coming to the first rehearsal, had to get 3 negative COVID tests, and they had to be the PCR tests, which usually have a 24 to 48 hour turnaround. So we really had to schedule it out and think, okay, if we want to have 5 tests by the beginning of the first rehearsal, when do they have to be? And then also, like, getting all the crew tested, and everybody, you know, anybody that was going to be in the building had to be tested. So, and then once that happened, then we had our little bubble, and those people were the only people that could be on set. And then and then once you're in the bubble, we still had to continue testing 3 times a week. We tested on Tuesday, Thursdays, and Saturdays throughout the process. So, you know, your nose gets a little raw from sticking that Q-tip up there all the time. You know, and there was one time during the rehearsal of An Iliad, actually, that Julia came back with an insufficient sample on hers and was not allowed to come not allowed to come up to rehearsal. So we were scrambling. I got a text early in the morning saying, we got to try to get Julia on stage. Can you help Sam? Our production manager set up a remote session so that Julia can continue to direct. And so Sam hustled, and we actually had some microphones that we had used to create sonnets for An Old Century, our Noise Now audio drama that is out now. And we put those up so that Julia could get really good audio back where she was. We put up a sound bar so that the actors could hear her speaking, and then we just created a little Zoom session so that they could all talk to each other. So there was, you know, we were constantly, like, working around all these different things. And then every day before anybody arrived on set, they had to answer a COVID screening, where you report your temperature and you answer questions about what symptoms if you have any symptoms, or if you've been exposed to anyone who had COVID. And then once you're at the theater, we have a COVID compliance officer, and everybody had to check in with our COVID compliance officer. And that COVID compliance officer would take their temperature, and then throughout the day, make sure that everybody is following all COVID protocols, which included everyone was double masked. Everybody got a brand new 2 brand new surgical masks when they arrived. And anyone who wanted the KN95 mask could also get those. And people who were up close film, like if like the sound guy was had to get in order to put mics on people. So sound people, anybody that was in situations like that, they had to wear the KN95s and also wear a protective shield over their face. And then we made everyone had to stay 6 feet apart, which is the difference between Actors Equity and SAG, which is the Stage Actors Union. The SAG-AFTRA allows actors to actually get close to each other. As once you're in the bubble, you can get close to each other, but Actors Equity has a little bit stricter requirements. So the whole show had to be reblocked. Julia reblocked the whole thing for film, so everybody stayed 6 feet apart, and it's actually like wonderfully creative, and she was able to pull some really oh wait, I'm actually thinking about I'm spilling into Alice here.
You're giving away our secrets. That's the next one. No, so true. So there are almost and I just had Deborah Strang, who plays the poet, put in the chat box that they, as in she and Jeff, did their best work when I was on that Zoom rehearsal. So I missed it. Now, Eric, will you? One of the things that I found so valuable in terms of your expertise, in the world of film and editing and all that, is that it was very important to us that the production feel like a filmed version of a stage play versus a film of a play. So we were constantly looking to that as a guiding principle for us. Will you speak to that a little bit, and how you worked with, how we all worked with Andressa Cordero, which is our wonderful director of photography, to achieve that?
Yeah, I think we brought Andressa on. We put out a job listing and on sites that were specifically for people in production, and found Andressa. That we had, everybody submitted their reels, and we looked through a bunch of reels, and everything in her reel was just stunningly beautiful. And we met with her and really liked talking with her. And then I think when we started talking about what we wanted the show to look like, we talked a lot about that, like how like this, we don't want to pretend like we're making a film here. We really want it to be clear that this is a stage production, but we wanted to up the production value from just like 3 locked off cameras, which is, I'm sure, something that she would never want to. She wouldn't have wanted to do anyway. But so we brought in a full package of production equipment. We had all the cameras were on the big film quality tripods with sliders on them to go back and forth, so that we bring in movement to the shots, so that we weren't just feeling like we were in static shots all the time. We had 3 cameras spaced throughout the house, and we were able to get different shots from each camera. So we were very focused on trying to give it, even though it was a stage production, we wanted to give it somewhat of a cinematic feel. So it really felt like something that was elevated above anything we had done in the past.
Yeah, and I found that really interesting, particularly in the editing process, because how you tell a story. I mean, the film world is not my world. My world is the theater, and so how you tell a story, in terms of filmmaking is different than what you have staged for a live production. And in those editing sessions, I participated in a number of them along with Eric. Sometimes you had to sync up, the story that we're trying to tell on stage with what she was capturing in terms of the filming of the production. So I found that to be a very interesting process in terms of reconciling those two.
Yeah, and there were, during the editing process, we had a lot of moments where, the editor did his pass without having been there, with us. And then when you came in with him and you fine tuned the notes to be like, this light change really means something in our storytelling pattern, and we want to see that in this cut. So can we make sure that we see that? And so that was really, I think that was a perfect moment about how like we're really using the stage production. We want to see that light shift. We don't want it to be hidden, and it will help us tell our story.
Yeah, and conversely, sometimes she would capture something in the camera that was not necessarily how I was thinking the moment should be articulated in the stage production, but it was revealing and it worked, and so we embraced that. And so it was a very really interesting process to be a part of. We're getting close to the end of our time here. My gosh, it's gone by so quickly. It's been wonderful having all of you wonderful people here sharing your thoughts on an Iliad, and it's really been an incredibly exciting process, and we're looking forward to sharing it with our audience. So before we sign off, I just have a few little reminders. We, of course, invite you and hope you will all tune in and watch an Iliad. And as we said before, I really do encourage you to watch both versions, because, there are two phenomenally talented actors, but also because I think it's interesting to listen to the words from these two very different perspectives. Also, I want to remind you that we have sonnets for an old century that is absolutely beautiful, and it's just released, and I think it's going to play till May the 9th, and that's an audio presentation, and it is by Jose Rivera and directed by our very own Jonathan Munoz-Prue, our Director of Cultural Programming. And finally, we will be having a conversation with the two poets, with Deborah Strang and Jeff Elliott, I believe, on May 9th. So there's a lot happening, a lot going on, and we are also so looking forward to hopefully being in the same space very soon. So we're going to go ahead and sign off, and we're going to sign off with an Iliad trailer. Thank you, guys. Talk soon. Bye-bye.
The arrows clanged at his back as the god quaked with rage.
And suddenly, a huge figure rises in
Over
the
against the ships he dropped to a knee. Tongue! Tongue! Whip! More! Stab! We all followed you to please you!
Dreams of men,
To fight for you!
triumph breaking in one. You see?